comment about that.
Yeah, I think what happened to us this season, you don't see in the span of someone's whole career. Yeah.
I'm just tired of our league. Those 6 words from Sophie Cunningham didn't echo through microphones as a complaint. They detonated like a warning shot fired straight at the WNBA's leadership. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't postseason exhaustion. It was the sound of a player drawing a line between survival and silence. Sophie's voice cracked the polished surface of the WNBA's carefully controlled image, exposing a truth that had been simmering beneath locker room walls for years. The league's foundation is crumbling under the weight of its own leadership failures. Her frustration wasn't isolated. It was shared, whispered, and now finally spoken out loud. What she said and how she said it flipped the entire conversation about Cathy Engelbert's tenure as commissioner and sparked a rebellion that might just define the future of women's basketball. Cunningham didn't mince words. She accused the very people running the league of being clueless about basketball fundamentals, of making executive decisions that put players at risk while pretending to prioritize growth. Her exit interview became something no PR department could contain. A manifesto for every player who'd ever been told to just be grateful. That comment cut deep because it wasn't about ego. It was about survival. When Sophie said she was tired of the league, she meant tired of the hypocrisy, the corporate spin, and the fake smiles that followed every press release about progress. She was tired of risking her body every night while those in suits cashed checks off her pain. And she wasn't the only one. Just days earlier, Nafisa Collier had stood before the cameras and shattered the unspoken rule that players never attack the commissioner directly. Her words were cold, sharp, and deliberate. Worst leadership in the world. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was a verdict. Collier had peeled back the curtain and revealed what everyone inside the league already knew. The WNBA doesn't have a talent problem. It has a leadership crisis. Her frustration wasn't just about bad calls or grueling travel schedules. It was about a system that keeps breaking its players while pretending to celebrate them. The integrity of the game, she said, had been compromised, not by the athletes or the fans, but by the people at the top refusing to listen. Collier's criticism wasn't some post-game rant. It was a direct indictment of Engelbert's governance. Year after year, players had voiced concerns about officiating inconsistency, about reckless physicality going unpunished, and about injuries piling up because officials couldn't maintain control. Those concerns were met not with reform, but with fines. Coaches who spoke out, Cheryl Reeve, Becky Hammond, were punished for telling the truth. The message from the top was clear. Silence your frustration or pay for it. And yet, players like Collier refused to shut up. She described leadership as tone-deaf, disconnected from the real product, the players, and their safety. She pointed out that while stars like Caitlin Clark were bringing record-breaking attention to the league, the WNBA's leadership had no roadmap to protect that momentum. What struck fans the hardest wasn't just the message, but the courage. This wasn't the kind of quiet discontent that fades after a few news cycles. Collier had lit the fuse, and Sophie Cunningham was about to set off the explosion. When Collier recalled sitting across from Engelbert and asking how she planned to address officiating failures, the commissioner allegedly responded, "Only losers complain about refs." And when Collier pressed about low salaries and poor player protections, Engelbert reportedly dismissed it by saying, "Caitlin Clark should be grateful she makes $16 million off the court." As if the WNBA's platform were the reason for her success. That arrogance wasn't just tone-deaf, it was insulting. Caitlin Clark didn't need the WNBA to become a superstar. The WNBA needed Caitlin Clark to survive its identity crisis. Then came the statement, the one Engelbert hoped would calm the storm. It was polished, hollow, and perfectly forgettable. She praised the players' passion, highlighted progress, and ended without addressing a single concrete issue. No acknowledgement of officiating meltdowns. No recognition of mounting injuries. No reflection on the growing player revolt. Fans saw right through it. What should have been leadership sounded like denial. And that denial fueled the very outrage Engelbert wanted to suppress. You can't silence a league full of women who have built their careers on resilience and expect them to go quietly. Sports media exploded. Reporters called it the reckoning the WNBA can't PR its way out of. Commentators who usually tiptoe around internal politics went all in. ESPN segments, podcasts, YouTube breakdowns. Everyone was dissecting the same question. How can a commissioner so out of touch still hold power? And then came the voices that made it mainstream. Stephen A. Smith, never one to hold back, torched Engelbert live on air. He called her response weak and unacceptable, saying flat out that her job should be on the line. Scott Van Pelt echoed the same sentiment, saying leadership has failed to meet the moment. For a league fighting for visibility, being publicly shredded by America's top sports broadcasters wasn't just bad optics. It was catastrophic. They weren't exaggerating. The league has failed to meet the moment. Caitlin Clark's rise gave the WNBA its biggest platform in history. Packed arenas, soaring ratings, viral highlights. But instead of harnessing that energy, Engelbert's office let inconsistency, neglect, and controversy overshadow it. And when Sophie Cunningham said she was tired, she was giving voice to what fans were already screaming online. We love this game. But the people running it don't. She was tired of watching her peers get hacked on drives, of playing through injuries, and of being treated like disposable labor by executives who don't understand the sport. Sophie's choice of words was surgical. When she said the leadership doesn't know basketball, it wasn't a casual jab. It was a dagger aimed at the core of Engelbert's credibility. She was calling out an entire culture of decision-makers who have never taken a charge, never fought through a screen, and never felt what it's like to sacrifice your body for a team that barely protects you. That disconnect, she argued, was killing the game from the inside. You can't grow a sport you don't understand. And the longer leadership hides behind buzzwords like sustainability and growth, the more players lose faith that anyone up top actually cares. From that moment, Sophie's interview became the lightning rod for a full-scale revolt. The players weren't just venting anymore, they were uniting. The murmurs that started with Collier were now echoing across the league. Even veterans who once avoided controversy began posting cryptic messages hinting at the same exhaustion. We deserve better. Enough is enough. Protect the product. Each post added fuel to the fire, and fans were no longer just spectators, they became amplifiers. Flooding social media with hashtags, demanding accountability, transparency, and new leadership. The line between player frustration and fan outrage vanished. What made Sophie's words so powerful wasn't just what she said, but how real it felt. You could hear the weariness in her tone, the resignation of someone who loves the game too much to keep pretending. She didn't sound like a rebel, she sounded like a truth-teller, forced into rebellion by inaction. Her words stripped away the corporate mask from Engelbert's regime and revealed the rot underneath. The WNBA doesn't suffer from lack of talent, lack of fans, or lack of money. It suffers from lack of accountability. And when accountability dies, so does integrity. By the time Sophie finished her exit interview, it wasn't just another off-season media moment. It was the start of a player revolution, a rebellion led not by anger, but by exhaustion. And that exhaustion is the most dangerous emotion for any league that relies on passion to survive. The WNBA can survive missed calls, injuries, even controversy. But it can't survive losing the trust of its players. And that's exactly what's happening. There are moments in sports when silence speaks louder than any whistle, and this was one of them. The crowd inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse wasn't just watching a basketball game anymore. They were witnessing a moment that would ripple across the entire WNBA. The Indiana Fever stood frozen in disbelief as the Las Vegas Aces celebrated. Their arms raised in triumph after a game that felt like it had been decided by everything except fair play. Fans weren't just angry, they were heartbroken, betrayed by the very system that was supposed to protect the integrity of the sport. For Caitlin Clark, this wasn't simply another loss, it was a test of resilience. It's a brutal reminder that even the brightest star in the league could be dimmed when politics and power collide on the court. Her eyes said it all, the quiet fury of someone who had given everything only to watch it stolen in plain sight. But the controversy didn't end when the final buzzer sound did. It only grew louder. Every replay, every slow-motion clip shared across social media became a spark in an already raging fire. Fans dissected every angle, every foul that wasn't, called every contact that mysteriously turned invisible to the referees. The pattern was undeniable. Time and time again, A'ja Wilson and the Aces seemed to get away with physical plays that would have sent any other team's players straight to the bench. Meanwhile, the Fever were punished for the slightest touch. Lexi Hull, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell-Leach took blows that would have earned free throws in any fair matchup. Yet the whistles stayed silent. The word rigged began trending within minutes, spreading faster than the Aces' confetti could hit the court floor. Caitlin Clark, the undeniable face of this new WNBA era, found herself at the center of a storm she didn't create but could no longer avoid. The league had celebrated her rise, used her name to boost ratings, fill arenas, and draw national headlines, but when it came to protecting her on the floor, it was as if that same league looked away. The double standard was painful to watch. One minute, Clark was hailed as the future of women's basketball. The next, she was being hacked, shoved, and targeted with no accountability in sight. And when she dared to question the calls or lack thereof, she was labeled emotional, dramatic, or inexperienced. The hypocrisy was staggering. Fans began asking the uncomfortable question: was the WNBA afraid of Caitlin Clark's success? The Fever locker room was tense that night. The players didn't need to say much, their expressions said enough. Boston sat in stunned silence, the normally calm leader visibly shaking her head as she replayed the final minutes in her mind. Hull was seen muttering to herself, trying to process how something so blatant could go unpunished. Even head coach Stephanie White, known for her composure, couldn't hold back her frustration. "We just want fairness," she told reporters, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with suppressed rage. "If we're going to fight this hard, we deserve the same respect every other team gets." It wasn't a complaint, it was a plea for justice. Across the internet, outrage erupted like wildfire. Clips of the controversial moments amassed millions of views overnight. Influencers, analysts, and former players joined the chorus of disbelief. Some called it the worst officiating display of this season. Others went even further, claiming the league was protecting its champions at the expense of a young rising team. Hashtags like Justice for Fever, Game Rigged, and Ref Bias flooded timelines. On Reddit and X, formerly Twitter, users compiled highlight reels that exposed the inconsistency in the officiating. ESPN segments debated whether the WNBA had a credibility problem. The discourse had escaped basketball circles. It had become a national sports controversy. And then came the deeper theories, ones that painted the picture of a league caught between its old guard and its new wave. The Aces represented dominance, experience, and a brand that the league had built for years around A'ja Wilson and Chelsea Gray. But the Fever represented change. Caitlin Clark's arrival had brought an entirely new generation of fans, a massive surge in ratings, and an undeniable cultural shift. That kind of power, some argued, made certain corners of the league nervous. Because with Clark came attention, accountability, and a level of scrutiny that could no longer be ignored. The idea that the old hierarchy might be fading didn't sit well with everyone, and that, fans believed, was exactly why the Fever were being kept in check. Meanwhile, Clark continued to carry herself with grace. Despite the chaos swirling around her, she didn't lash out or point fingers in interviews. Her restraint only made fans admire her more, but those close to the team could see the fire behind her composure. Every practice that followed, every shoot-around, Clark's intensity grew sharper. She knew that every time she stepped on the court, she wasn't just representing the Fever, she was representing fairness, resilience, and a generation that refused to be silenced. They can try to break us, one teammate reportedly said, but they'll never break her. The WNBA's silence only made things worse. Days went by without an official statement addressing the officiating, leaving fans and players feeling even more disrespected. Analysts compared the situation to other major sports leagues, noting that in the NBA or NFL, controversies this blatant were at least acknowledged. The absence of transparency felt deliberate, almost taunting. It wasn't just about missed calls anymore, it was about trust. Fans began to question whether outcomes were being subtly influenced to protect narratives, markets, or establish champions. When sports lose that trust, they lose their soul. By midweek, talk shows, podcasts, and even non-sports outlets had picked up the story. Commentators like Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe weighed in, demanding accountability. You can't build your brand off Caitlin Clark's name and then act blind when she's being targeted, one analyst said. The phrase echoed through social media, becoming a rallying cry for Fever supporters. Attendance numbers proved it. People weren't just watching for basketball. They were watching to see justice unfold. The league had accidentally turned the Fever into the most sympathetic and compelling story in women's sports. The Fever's next practice session drew an unprecedented media turnout. Reporters packed the gym waiting to see how the team would respond. CaitlinClark.com, but determined, addressed the media with poise beyond her years. "We can't control the refs," she said, "but we can control how we play. And we're not backing down." It was the kind of quote that sends chills through fans, the embodiment of quiet strength. Her words weren't just about basketball. They were about integrity. Every syllable carried the weight of what it means to fight for fairness when the odds are stacked against you. The Aces, on the other hand, tried to brush off the criticism. A'ja Wilson defended her team's play, calling it just physical basketball, but fans weren't buying it. Screenshots of questionable plays and slowed-down replays contradicted her narrative. Physical was one thing, this was something else entirely. The debate wasn't about toughness, it was about equality. And in the eyes of many, equality had been nowhere to be found in that semi-final showdown. The tension reached a boiling point when Stephanie White hinted at filing a formal complaint with the league. Though she didn't confirm details, her comments suggested that behind the scenes, the Fever organization was gathering evidence. Insiders whispered about possible footage submissions and private meetings demanding accountability. Whether the league would act was another matter, but one thing was certain, the Fever weren't going to let this go quietly. By the time Friday rolled around, the story had evolved into something bigger than basketball. It was about justice, gender bias, and the invisible politics that often shape women's sports. Fans who had never watched a WNBA game before were now tuning in, not for entertainment, but for truth. The Fever had become a symbol, a reminder that fairness isn't a privilege, it's a right. And Caitlin Clark, standing at the heart of it all, wasn't just fighting for her team, she was fighting for the future of the league itself. Because sometimes what defines a champion isn't a trophy or a scoreboard. It's how you stand when everything feels rigged against you. And as the dust settled from that chaotic night, one thing became clear. The Indiana Fever may have lost the game, but they had won something far more powerful, the hearts of millions who believed that integrity still matters. Sometimes it's not the scoreboard that decides a legacy, it's the storm that follows. The days after the Fever Aces showdown felt less like post-game analysis and more like a national reckoning. Everywhere you looked, TV screens, podcasts, social media threads, one question echoed like thunder. Was the game rigged? It wasn't just a whisper among angry fans anymore. It was a full-blown conversation about the integrity of the WNBA itself. The Indiana Fever, once dismissed as an underdog rebuilding franchise, had suddenly become the face of a movement demanding fairness and accountability. What had started as a controversial semifinal had evolved into a defining moment for women's sports. And right at the center stood Caitlin Clark, no longer just a rookie phenom, but a symbol of resistance in a league struggling to balance old power with new promise. The emotional toll on the team was undeniable. Players who had fought their entire careers for recognition were now wrestling with the bitter taste of injustice. Aaliyah Boston, who had carried herself with quiet leadership all season, broke her silence during a post-practice interview. "We know what we saw," she said firmly. "And so does everyone else." Her voice didn't shake. It cut through the noise like steel. Kelsey Mitchell, usually upbeat, admitted the loss felt different. Not because of the score, but because of how it happened. Even Lexi Hull, one of the team's toughest defenders, confessed that the lack of accountability from officials hurt more than any hit we took on the court. These weren't excuses, they were confessions of players who had given everything, only to see their fight overshadowed by bias. Meanwhile, the Fever fan base had transformed into a movement. What began as frustration had turned into activism. Fans organized petitions demanding officiating reviews. Sports talk shows were flooded with call-ins defending Indiana. And the hashtag Justice for Fever had amassed millions of impressions across platforms. TikTok creators broke down controversial plays frame by frame. Twitter threads went viral dissecting the power dynamics of the league. Even casual sports viewers unfamiliar with WNBA politics started picking sides. The Fever weren't just another team anymore, they were the people's team. The underdog standing against the establishment. The backlash grew so strong that WNBA executives could no longer ignore it. Behind closed doors, league officials reportedly held emergency meetings to address the damage control needed after what had become the most polarizing postseason in years. But the Fever weren't waiting for apologies. Stephanie White, unwavering and proud, continued to push for transparency. "We'll review every angle, every call," she said, "because our players deserve respect." Insiders claimed that video compilations were being prepared by the Fever's analytics team to highlight missed calls and inconsistent officiating. Though the league tried to keep things quiet, word leaked that several referees from that semifinal were under internal review. Yet the silence from the top remained deafening. No public statement, no admission, no accountability. Too many? That silence said everything. And while the league hesitated, Caitlin Clark acted. She didn't rant or retaliate, she trained harder. Witnesses at Fever practices described her as laser-focused, staying long after team drills ended, working on free throws and mid-range shots until exhaustion.